Hey, good afternoon, and it is such an honor to be here with the Amplify family and with Andy and the team. Aren't you grateful for their leadership and just all they've put together this week and how we've been inspired and challenged? Hey, show of hands on something. Do any of you like me like to fish, or you're a fisherman? Anybody in the room? There's a few of us. I like to fish. I have a favorite fishing spot. Our family vacations every year. I've done it every year of my life on a lake in northern Minnesota. But the lake where I really like to fish, you really have to work to get there. We have to trailer our boat, and we have to drive about 20 miles to another lake. There's no place to launch on this particular lake where I like to fish. We have to launch on another lake. We motor across that lake. There's a number of homes, cabins around the lake. You'll see other boats. You'll see fishing boats out there. You'll see some wakeboard boats and things like that. And then you come to a channel that's about the length of 2 football fields. And it's about 6 feet wide. There's lily pads on each side. There'll be like a wall of white birch tree and pine trees. And you have to slow your fishing boat way down when you get to the channel because it gets shallower. And so you kind of putz through a little bit, and then you have to raise your motor a little bit so it doesn't touch the bottom of the channel, and kind of putz through a little more. Then it gets so shallow, you have to lift your motor out of the water, get out your oars, and row through the channel for a ways. Then about the last 50 feet or so, the bottom of the boat starts hitting the bottom of the channel, and that's when my wife and family get out and pull me through the rest of the way. No, we all get out of the boat, and we portage the boat through the rest of the way. But then, at the end of that channel, it opens up to just like the most beautiful, peaceful lake that you've ever seen. I've seen just incredible sunsets. Deer come drink out of the side of the water. There's only 2 cabins on this particular lake. I've never seen more than maybe 3 or 4 boats at any given time on that lake. But the fishing is just incredible. Like for years, we have brought home bucket loads of fish. And you say, well, Gene, if the fishing is so great, and if the views are so incredible, and if it's such a beautiful place, I mean, like, why aren't there more people back there? And the answer is very simple. It just takes so much work to get there. You got to trailer your boat. You got to drive 20 miles. You got to launch on another lake. You got to cruise across that first lake. You got to come to the channel. You got to slow way down. You got to lift your motor and putz through a little bit. You got to get out your oars and row through a little bit. And then you got to get out of the boat and portage it through a little bit. It just takes so much work to get there. But only those who are willing to endure the work of going through that channel experience the better fishing on the other side. We've been reminded the last 2 days, we're in the fishing business. We've been called to reach people for Jesus Christ, and our vision's been expanded. Our hearts have been moved. Our passion for those far from God has expanded over the recent hours. But here's the problem. In a few hours, you're going to get in your vehicle. You're going to hop on a plane, and you're going to return to your ministry setting, most of us in local churches, and you're not going back to a situation where the things are the way you dream they can be. You're going back to how things are right now. And you've got a channel of change in front of you. Some of you are feeling led to go home and start a new ministry of some kind and a new outreach. You got an idea and a breakout today to impact, to reach a new group of people. Some of you are going back with a heart to kind of retool and re-envision an existing ministry in your ministry setting. Possibly some of you are feeling led like I was 17 years ago to go transform an entire church. So how do you translate what God has been doing in your heart in the last 24 hours, what he's been doing in your soul? How do you translate that into your church, into your ministry setting, without blowing things apart? Now, I don't want to oversimplify the process of leading through change, but I think it really helps me to think of it as a farmer planting seed or a gardener planting seed, because there are 4 phases to that. I mean, first you have to prepare the soil. You don't want to plant seed in rocky soil, on hard soil, weedy soil. Jesus told us what happens when we do that, so we want fertile soil. And then second, you plant the seed. the change, the new initiative, the new vision that you have, you actually implement. And then third, once it's planted, you're not done. You have to cultivate. Because even after planting, you have to fertilize, you have to water. There might even be a few weeds that you have to pull, right? And then finally you experience what you dreamed about, the harvest. The harvest. Now, by nature, we look at that right there, and what we want to go home and experience stage 2 and stage 4, just like that, right? We want to do the new thing, and we want to experience the harvest. But listen, you are going to win or lose, you are going to succeed or fail based on steps 1 and 3. Preparing the soil, and then once you've implemented, learning to cultivate. So let's just talk about that a little bit today. How do you prepare the soil for change, for life change to happen? 17 years ago this month, I became the pastor of Eastside Christian Church in Orange County, California. In fact, I had begun my ministry journey there as a 20-year-old intern back in 1990. And I had never seen a church or been a part of anything like it. The people worshiped with joy, they served with passion, and when my late mentor, the pastor Ben Merrill, preached the gospel, people responded and put their faith in Jesus and were baptized. Ben pastored that church for 22 years. And at the age of 65 in 1991, he stepped away. And over the next 17 years, let's just say the church lost focus. And it lost its way. It lost its sense of vision. It lost its sense of mission. You see, preparing the soil for change always starts with raising urgency. People have to be convinced there's a problem before they're willing to change anything, before they have any urgency to do something new. Our church had become predominantly gray-haired, and it was a fraction, size-wise, of what it once was. And so we started having conversations with staff and with board members and leaders asking, if we roll this videotape ahead 10 years, what will our church look like if we don't take some courageous action right now to reach new generations, new people with the gospel of Jesus? You see, all of us need some measurable data to share with our leaders and churches to raise urgency, to say, as Nicole mentioned, Houston, we have a problem. If 75% of your community is unchurched, tell them. If 9 out of 10 baptisms in your church last year were simply the kids of family members in your church, don't pretend that a wave of evangelism is happening in your church. Another component of preparing the soil is clarifying your purpose. On my first day at Eastside, I noticed there was a sign in the church lobby hanging on the wall there that everybody seemed to be quite proud of. And it was a quote. You've probably used this quote. You've seen it. But the quote is, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So in one of my very first staff members with the team there, I wrote that quote on a flip chart. I had it, at the front of the room, and I said, hey, I've seen the sign in the office. Everybody seems to be quite proud of it. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. I wonder if you all would tell me today what the main thing is. So I've got a flip chart at the front of the room. I turn the page, and I just start writing line by line as people started telling me what the main thing was at the church. We filled 5 pages of main things in the discussion that day. And they started laughing like you're laughing right now because they all realized we don't know what the main thing is. And so we went through a strategic planning process. We formed a dream team with some staff, with some key board members, with a couple of people that had good hearts and influence in the church. And I said to them, I don't care how long it takes us. I don't care if it takes us 6 weeks, 6 months, or a year to do this planning process. But let's pray. Let's seek God. Let's study the Bible until we all have a sense and we're just of consensus and unanimity about we know what the main thing is. And ultimately, we decided to keep it simple. There are 1,000 churches, 1,000 things that a church can do. But we decided we were only going to be focused, after months of this, we were only going to be focused on an ever-increasing number of people pursuing God, building community, unleashing compassion. An ever-increasing number of people in pursuit of God in our weekend services, building community in small groups and volunteer teams, and unleashing compassion locally and globally. That would become our start doing list, and that would also be our stop doing list. And can I tell you something we learned in that process that's very counterintuitive about raising evangelistic intensity in the church? I hope I don't get sued for pastoral malpractice for what I'm about to say. But we learned to reach more people, we needed to do less ministry. Which sounds crazy, right? It just sounds crazy. I discovered within my first 3 months at the church that we didn't have 3 programs to help adults grow spiritually. We didn't have 5 programs to help adults grow spiritually. There weren't 10, there weren't 15, there weren't 20, there weren't 30 programs to help adults grow spiritually. We had 32 different programs to help adults grow spiritually in our church. And it became pretty clear pretty fast to me why we weren't making much of an evangelistic impact as a church. And it's not that people in our church didn't love their neighbors, they did. It's not that they didn't possess a heart to make an impact on those who were far from God, they did. It's just that people in our church were so busy going to church programs. They didn't have time to make an evangelistic impact, even if they wanted to. We had people literally, I'm not making this up, in 4 or 5 different ministries. We had created a whole subculture of small group, addicts of some kind, junkies. We had to start a support group for groupaholics in our recovery ministry. But you see, over time, this is what happens in every church. Churches just tend to start more and more ministries, more and more programs, more and more activities, all very good things, but they're all designed for everybody who's already there, the already convinced. And the more and more pulls us out of the very neighborhoods and the very communities and prevents us from loving the very neighbors that Jesus came to seek and save. Now, don't miss this. We invested 8 months preparing the soil before we planted the seed of change. Honestly, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I don't think I would have had the patience to do that, nor did I have the wisdom to do that. But I've learned the hard way by taking time, months if needed, to prepare the soil for change. You can actually move further faster once you ultimately plant the seed for change. And planting the seed always begins with casting a compelling vision, always. After 8 months of strategic planning and praying and dreaming with staff and board members and key influencers, it was time to cast this vision to our entire church. And we did it with a 4-week vision series. In the first week, I gave the high-level vision of how we were only going to focus on an ever-increasing number of people pursuing God in weekend services, building community in small groups, and serving as volunteers and unleashing compassion locally and globally. And of course, in that setting, that meant some much-loved ministries would be going away, which had some painful implications for some heavily invested people in those ministries. And predictably, there was a grief that was associated with that. And I concluded my message that morning by saying, I know some of you are probably saying, well, Gene, you're just loony. We've got a loony new pastor at our church. And I said, you know what? You're probably right. I probably am a loony new pastor. But I want you to know I'm not the only loony person in this church. And then I invited our staff, and I invited our elder board and our strategic planning team to join me on the stage. There are about 35 of them. And I said, I want you to know these people are just as loony as I am. And then I added, I had my assistant do the math this week, and represented on this stage right now are 688 years of connection in this church. These people love this church. They've given their lives, their prayer, their sacrifices, their serving to this church and to advance it. And they would never do anything to harm this church. And as best as we can understand today, as we've prayed, as we've dreamed, as we've sought God to lead us, this is the direction we feel He's calling us to go. And we're asking, would you lock arms and lock hearts with us in this adventure? Now, there are several powerful dynamics going on in a moment like that. But one of the most important is that everybody in the church knew somebody on that stage. Everybody in the church knows somebody. And I learned a long time ago, it's not how many embrace a change initiative that determines if it will succeed or fail. It's who embraces the change initiative that determines if it succeeds or fails. Almost everybody in the room could look at somebody on stage and say, hey, if Tim Bond is in favor of that, I mean, he's a reasonable guy, maybe I ought to be too. If Julie Leem is in favor of that, she grew up in this church. She was born in this church. She's loved this church her entire life. Maybe I should talk to her about this. People knew who they could ask for questions. And within the coming months, we planted that seed and those changes. And of course, with any change, it was not without speed bumps. It was not without pain and some headwinds and occasional conflict or a misunderstanding. But we weathered it because we had taken the time to prepare the soil, and our leaders were united in leading this evangelistic reboot, this evangelistic rebuild of our church. Now, let's talk truthful. Between Egypt and the Promised Land, there's always a wilderness, right? And that's when you need to intentionally cultivate. As you start implementing these new initiatives, you discover there's some watering, there's some fertilizing, there's some weeds that have to be pulled. And one of the best ways to water, to fertilize this, or to add jet fuel to it, is to celebrate short-term wins. Tell stories. Friends, if you lead through a change initiative in your church and people adjust and they sacrifice and they give time and money, they stop doing some old things, they start doing some new things, and there's not some visible results of some kind within the next 6 months, get ready to update your resume. That's not hard to understand, is it? People need to see fruit as early as possible about how Jesus is changing lives. I keep a .38 caliber bullet in the top drawer of my desk. And you say, that's probably a weird thing for a pastor to keep in the top drawer of their desk, right? And it is. But one Sunday, after we had initiated some major changes to be more effective in reaching people, a guy came up to me. He's 27 years old, redheaded guy. And he had that bullet in his hand. And he said, here, Gene, I want you to have this. And I didn't know what that meant. Nobody had ever given me a bullet after a sermon before. And he said, I wanted you to have this. I was going to put that in my head this week. He said, but what happened here today was incredible, and this service saved my life. And maybe through Jesus, there's hope for me. So, guess what I'm holding in my hand the next Sunday in our services? That bullet. And I said, I know some of the changes we've been navigating as a church. They've been tough, they've been hard, they've been difficult. But because of your willingness to flex and change, here's a bullet that's not going to be used. And Jesus is using you to save lives. Celebrate the wins. Pour gasoline on this thing. Now, there's nothing like going through the channel of change where you prepare the soil, you plant the seed, you cultivate, and finally, by God's grace, in His time, you experience the harvest of better fishing. And by God's grace, we've experienced it in our church. A 63-year-old church that was stuck and declining is reaching and baptizing people today at levels that take our breath away. Our weekend attendance has multiplied by 5x. And much more importantly, the number of people following Jesus and being baptized has multiplied by 20x. We've had over 1,100 baptisms in the last 12 months. And while we celebrate all that collectively, I just got to tell you, the most rewarding part for me is to celebrate the harvest of the gospel in the lives of people that I love and know personally. 6 or 7 years ago, I started to get my hair cut from a guy. I'm just going to call him Luke. That's not his name. Luke told me he was high every time he was cutting my hair. He was smoking weed all day long to deal with his anxiety. And, I'm no prude, honestly, but Luke had maybe the most colorful vocabulary I've ever heard in my life. And I didn't know cuss words could be strung together in such creative ways in one collective deal. His wife, I'm going to call her Jill, did my wife's hair. They had their shop, chairs next to each other. And oh, by the way, the shop that they owned also doubled as a drug paraphernalia shop that they sold. Now, not to be overly graphic, but I'm just going to give you a little sense of the colorful conversations Barbara and I would have with them as we would get our hair cut. Barbara asked Jill, his wife, one day, "Hey, how did you and Luke meet?" She says, "Oh, I came in one day to get my nipples pierced." She said, "I thought Luke was gay, but I found out he's not." We just kept praying. And we just kept loving this couple for years. 2 years ago this December, I get a text one Sunday morning, and it's from Luke. And he said, "You'll never guess where I am. I'm sitting in church watching you on a large screen." And he had found his way to one of our campuses. And I'm telling you, ever since, Jesus has been changing Luke and Jill's lives. And a few months ago, I was preaching in August on loving your neighbor. And afterwards, I got this text from Luke, and he said, "Gene, your message this morning about loving your neighbor had me in tears. It made me realize that at my lowest point in my life, there was someone that never gave up on me and trying to be my neighbor. I want to thank you for always seeing me for me, never judging me for my bad life choices, and continuously being my neighbor till I came home to Jesus. I love you guys for everything. Thank you." 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in church on the front row of one of our campuses right next to Luke and Jill. And they had their hands lifted high in worship to the way, the truth, and the only one who has given them life, where they have found real life. And I just sat there thinking, oh God, thank you for a church that has had the courage to change so that friends like Luke and Jill can know that Jesus died and rose for them too. Leading through change is difficult. It's why so few people dare to do it. But if you'll wisely prepare the soil, when the time is right, plant the seed, lovingly cultivate, water, fertilize, pull a few weeds, you're going to experience the harvest of some better fishing on the other side as more and more Luke and Jills find their way home to Jesus. God bless you guys. Love you. Thank you.